Hello, hi guys. Okay, let's start because it seems that the others are not here. So I won't keep you for long today. Today what I mean to do is to go through chapter 5 and 6, which are the two chapters in which Plotinus talks directly about the soul. That's okay. Sorry, there is my wife that is working at home today, so there is a bit of extra noise. Well, I was saying we're going to go through chapter 5 and 6, which is the unit in which Plotinus treats directly the reality of the soul. And about this, these two chapters, two are the concepts that I want to focus on. One is what the soul itself is and how Plotinus thinks of it. And the other one is a concept that we have already encountered, but which comes back again in this chapter and is deepened, namely the concept or notion of ikiosis, of let's say, of appropriating oneself of its own qualities. So let's start. As I promised, I'll be very quick. So let's start from the soul. Let's clarify first this term, soul. When we say soul in English, we think almost by default of something that pertains the single individual and represents the spiritual part of the individual. And as such, the soul is a notion that belongs to the way of thinking of people who believe in, for example, an afterlife. So, to sum things up, for us, the soul is a matter of belief and represents the immaterial part of what one individual is. As such, if one believes it, each one of us has a soul. Is it so for the ancients? Is it what they meant by the word soul? No. First of all, the word soul in Greek is psyche. Let me write it down for you so that you have it. Psyche. Psyche in Latin transliteration. Psyche. Now, psyche literally, in its most concrete meaning, refers to the breath, to the breath that is present in anything that lives. Anything that lives, one way or the other, has breath. So it refers to something in a way tangible, in a certain way. Tangible in the sense that it is evident. So it doesn't refer to the eternal spiritual principle present in an individual which characterizes that individual as such, as individual. But instead, it refers to the breathing life which as such is present in anything that lives. Anything that lives has psyche, okay? So for the ancients, psyche is simply coextensive with life. This is a very important point to keep in mind. Let me put it in other terms. What we are trying to bring to the fore is a difference in understanding regarding the word soul. The word soul translates the Greek psyche, okay? When we say soul, when we human beings of the modern age who come after Christianity say soul, we think of, as I said before, an individual reality, and particularly the spiritual part of an individual reality, in such a way that I can say that I am essentially my soul. My soul is my eternal part, which makes me into an individual. And this notion, as we know it and as we practice it, is of course a matter of belief. For the ancients instead, when I say for the ancients, I mean the way in which the ancients used this word. For them, the word soul doesn't refer to any such thing, but it refers simply to life. Life. Why is that? How do we know that? Well, we know that because, first of all, the word soul, psyche, means essentially the breath, the living breath. The living breath is present in anything that lives. Hence, soul, i.e. psyche, is simply coextensive with life, okay? Is that clear to everybody? So, when Plotinus thinks or says psyche, he is thinking of life.
Is this the same as the one used in the Phaedo?
Yeah, it's the exact same word, psyche, and it's the exact same concept. One of the questions that govern the thought of ancient philosophy is exactly regarding psyche. What is psyche? Okay, what is life? Now, one thing that they all agree on is that psyche is life. That's one thing that they agree on. That psyche is life. Psyche is Zoe. When it comes, though, to a definition of psyche, there Aristotle himself says, well, the life, Zoe or psyche, is very difficult to define. However, let's describe its parts. And then he goes on into describing the various parts of psyche. Aristotle does so in his little treatise called Peripsychis, on the soul, which is something quite strange, dividing into parts something whose definition escapes you. In any case. So one of the central questions of ancient philosophy is what is psyche? And by virtue of psyche being coextensive to life, we could say that one of the essential questions of ancient philosophy is what is life? We could say, and no, not we could, we can say that Plotinus has this question in mind, what is life? And that when he treats about psyche, he's treating the question of life, looking at it from a certain perspective, precisely the perspective of psyche. So psyche, for Plotinus, is a certain manifestation of life. This is very important. Psyche, for Plotinus, is a certain manifestation of life. In other words, for Plotinus, psyche is not life tout court. Psyche is life already manifesting itself in a certain way. Or to use philosophical jargon, psyche is life already somehow qualified. And what is the characteristics that make psyche a certain type of life? Well, the fact that psyche appears as an unfolding, And here I come to the first term that I wanted to focus on. If you read chapter 5, the key word there in chapter 5 is the word exitylon. Now, let me see. What is it? Oh, it closed down. Sorry, guys, my computer's a bit acting up. I'd opened the file, it closed down again. I tell you, this teaching online is extremely difficult. What again? Okay. Wait, give me a second. Can you ask at the butcher whether they sell pork cheek? Just pork cheek. Thank you. Give me a second, guys. I'm looking something up. Chapter 5. Give me a second.
Professor, I think Wei Min has shared the word exitylon.
Exitylon, yes, which I translated fading away, okay? Fading away. In my translation, is rendered with fading away. It is towards the end of paragraph 5 of chapter 5. Why is this a key word? Because it tells you in which way psyche is a specification of life, in which way psyche is a certain type of life. Is life in its unfolding, and this unfolding is understood by Plotinus as the getting more tenuous of something that, so to say, comes down from a center of absolute concentration and power. That center of absolute concentration and power, we will see later, is the nous, and at the core of the nous, there is the tendency to oneness itself. But what is then the specificity of psyche as form of life, as manifestation of life? This descending unfolding, this unfolding downwards, and by unfolding, it becomes, the potency that governs life becomes more tenuous, okay? In fact, psyche appears as having different levels. In chapter 5, Plotinus specifies once more a doctrine that is his own, and which appears in all of the Enneads, a doctrine according to which psyche, in its continuous downwards unfolding, appears as having different levels. The highest level is the level in which the psyche lives at the noetic, in the noetic manner. That is to say, in which the psyche lives like the nous, lives like the intellect. It's all gathered up around the intellect. The second level is the level in which the psyche, in its totality and through its totality, brings into being and governs the whole of this sensible world in which we live. And finally, the lower level, the lowest level, is the one in which psyche becomes physis, becomes power of growth, manifests itself as power of growth, and as power of growth governs each individual thing. Is this clear? So this downward unfolding that psyche is can be seen in the levels in which psyche itself can be and is divided. So you have the level of maximum concentration, maximum gathering around the nous, the level at which the psyche lives and works as nous, almost. Then we have the level of psyche as the governing principle of the whole. So also of the phenomenal and sensitive world in which we live. And finally, psyche already at the lowest level, the vegetative level, which is the level of the power of growth, which then goes on to be divided into the various individual existing things. Now, this partition of psyche we can see in a particularly striking way in one of the many realities that compose the totality of the whole, namely the human being. In the human being, we see that the life that animates it appears in different forms or as having different faculties. The highest one is the logical or noetic faculty, the faculty of intellection, the mind, basically, what the subsequent tradition has called the mind. The middle one is the faculty whereby through the various passions, through the various interactions with the sensitive dimension, the soul governs the body. And finally, the vegetative part, okay? This is very schematically the way in which psyche manifests itself to be a certain way, a certain manifestation of life. And what is the important point in all this? Again, the fact that psyche is this downward unfolding. This downward unfolding is understood by Plotinus as a fading away. A fading away of what? A fading away of the originary power or potency, which, as we will see, finds in the act of the nous, or intellect, the highest moment. And then from then on, through this downward unfolding, becomes or grows weaker and weaker until it reaches it reaches its own exhaustion. These are the first things that one must keep in mind in order to understand what Plotinus means by the notion of psyche. Now, this downward unfolding of psyche, Plotinus understands also as the downward unfolding of the act of vision, i.e. of theoria, whereby each higher level is an accomplished theoria, which in its turn gives birth, so to say, to another lower theoria, which forms itself as a power that gathers itself up into shape around the object of vision offered to it by the higher level. So it's like a spiral, okay, in a way. And this downward descending activity of theoria, Plotinus understands, as we've seen already when we discussed the power of growth, Plotinus understands as some kind of making. Okay, is it everything is clear so far? Do you have questions that you want to ask?
So the fading away is just a gradual weakening of this theoria as we go down?
Yeah, exactly. That's what it is. And this fading away is a sort of making. It's a sort of making that, as we've seen in the previous chapters, operates in relation to a model, which is the ethos, around which and looking at which the making is organized or organizes itself. Okay? That's the first important point. Now, this is what comes out in chapter 5. Okay? Now, how does Plotinus understand this descending unfolding, this downward unfolding? Or rather than how does he understand it? Yeah, how does he understand it? As we said already, he understands it as a fading away. What does this fading away mean? It means that every successive resulting reality is there because the power that constantly tends desirously towards oneness is not strong enough, is not powerful enough to keep itself all gathered up around that same oneness. So it gets scattered, and while getting scattered, it keeps tending towards unity, and thus it keeps going back to the origin, which is also the model it comes from. Okay? How does Plotinus, in which terms does Plotinus describe this dynamic that I just highlighted? And that's the interesting part. He describes it with a terminology that has to do with the sphere of cognition. What does he say in the second half of chapter 6? Okay, he says first that the more the logos is silent, the more the reality is gathered up around itself. Hence, the less is scattered. How does he then further characterize this silence? He characterizes it as pistis, literally confidence. Let me write it down. Sorry. Pistis equal confidence. What is this confidence he's talking about? He characterizes this confidence in the few lines that stand at the center of chapter 6 as the awareness, which goes without discourse, which goes without talking, the awareness of possessing oneself and the thing that make oneself up. So the more a reality is confident, is certain of itself, a certainty that, as I said, and as Plotinus says, comes before wording, before discoursing about it. The more a reality is certain about itself, the more it is, and hence, the less it will need to interrogate itself around itself. So what is it that Plotinus is indicating as the sign of the weakening, of the fading away of which we talked before? Precisely the phenomenon of self-consciousness. Because one aspect of self-consciousness is that of wandering around oneself, wandering about oneself, in order to figure out what oneself is. Now, the soul, in its, above all, in its highest manifestation, in its highest level, has no such need at all. The soul is characterized by a very high confidence. Confidence which is the cognitive parallel, so to say, of the synesthesis, of the awareness that we saw characterized the power of growth. And this confidence, Plotinus further characterizes as that way of being whereby the knower and the known are one, whereby there is no distinction between the knower and the known. Now, here, if we take the thing from the cognitive point of view, an interesting point opens up regarding the understanding that Plotinus has of truth. Why do I say that? Well, because truth, the way it is understood by Plato, first of all, and then by Aristotle, truth consists basically in an homeosis, which in Latin was translated as adequatio. That is to say, truth is understood as an agreement between the knower and the known. And particularly an agreement that works as a cognitive mechanism expressed through words. So, the understanding of truth that Plato and Aristotle have is one whereby truth is the result of a cognitive agreement that works through words. But precisely because it is this, it is also the mark of a distance between the knower and the known. Plotinus, basing himself on this understanding of truth, affirms that the complete truth can be reached only when this agreement is total. And when is it that this agreement is total? When the breach, the existence of which is demonstrated by the need for words, when the breach is completely bridged, and hence once the knower and the known are one. So truth for Plotinus is the standing of the thing in itself before any word is uttered, and in fact with no need for any word to be uttered, because any utterance of words marks already a breach between knowing and known. Okay, this is an important point. William says, if this agreement works through words, is it entirely separate from discursive thought? No. In fact, that's what I'm saying, that the concept of truth as presented by Plato and Aristotle is completely within discursive thought, completely within discursive thought, because the agreement is the result of discursive thought for Plato and Aristotle. However, since Plato had already said that the goal of human being is that to become similar, homeosis to theo, to come to an agreement with the divinity, right? What is it that here Plotinus understands as the divinity? The soul itself as a higher reality compared to the single realities we belong to. And hence, this concept of homeosis, this concept of agreement, becomes one whereby truth is understood as the perfect adherence of one thing to itself. So truth is understood as the overcoming, because the overcoming of any discursive thought, because any discursive thought, the moment in which truth is truly there, is unnecessary. Okay? Is that understood? Is it clear for everybody? This is an important point.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, sorry for I didn't capture it well. So you mean the Plotinus thinks that the truth does not lie within the realm of discursive thoughts.
No, he says that the level of discursive thought doesn't contain truth in its totality, and that truth in its totality, in its reality, for Plotinus, corresponds to the identity of each single reality with itself, with no need for any agreement through words. Okay?
Okay, understood.
Which, of course, tells us a lot about Plotinus' philosophy, Plotinus's philosophy, both if we compare it to Aristotle's thought and if we compare it to the thought of someone who will come much later, but in a constant engagement with Greek thought, namely Heidegger. But this is matter for another discussion that I don't want to get into now. Yes. So in this concept of pistis, of confidence, goes hand in hand with the concept of possessing oneself. The more one is confident of itself, one reality is confident of itself, the more it possesses itself, the less it needs any discursive thought around itself, and for that matter, around anything else. Okay? The more it is confident, the more it possesses itself, the less it needs any inquiry, any discursive thought around itself, the more it is in truth. What does then truth mean for Plotinus? The identity of one thing with itself. The identity that as such needs no words. Okay? This is a very important point.
Prof, just to be sure, this is an extension of what we see in chapter 4 in the relation between the act of vision and praxis, correct? Where because men do not possess sufficiently what is proper act of vision in the weakness of soul, are unable to grasp.
Precisely. And that's where I wanted to come at the end, right? The end of this chapter is, in a way, it looks back at what was said in chapter 4, and it presents a counter example to the example of the stupid children that was referred at the end of chapter 4. Who is the wise men? The wise man is that man who, by living mostly at the level of the noetic soul, that is to say at the highest level of the soul, lives in perfect agreement with the intellect. That is to say, has become one with it. And because of that, he doesn't need, as for himself, discursive thought. To others, he appears as an unfolding discourse. but to himself, Plotinus says, he is calm vision. Vision of what? Vision, direct contact, hence, of the intellect. So you have here the exact counterexample to the example of the stupid children. The stupid children, precisely because they cannot silently, calmly grasp in themselves the vision or the objects of vision around which they deep inside gravitate, they try to bring them out in order to see them. And that's the unfolding of praxis, of the practical activity. The wise men instead, as Plotinus says, lelogiste idi, which I translated with, let me go see. The wise man is thoroughly turned into a logos. The wise man is himself already enacting logos. And as such, he doesn't need to do anything that has to do with praxis, with the bringing out of what he possesses inside. All right, so these were the two main points, 2 or 3 main points that I wanted to touch regarding the soul. Now we will have to talk about the intellect, the nous, and within the next 2 days I'm going to translate chapter 7 and chapter 8 and chapter 9. I've already translated chapter 7, so within the next 2 days you're going to have up to chapter 9, okay? And chapter 8 and chapter 9 are the 2 chapters in which the intellect is treated. So now we're reaching the core of Theoria, which is that active core out of which any other thing unfolds. All right?
Hi, Professor. Can I clarify first? Does this mean that at the highest level, the philosopher does not think at all in the sense of discursive thought?
Yeah, it does. At the highest level, the philosopher doesn't have discursive thought, but it doesn't mean that he doesn't think for Plotinus, because thinking for Plotinus in its core is not discursive thought, but is the continuous act, the continuous being at work, whereby anything that is, gathers itself up around the one in oneness. So thinking for Plotinus is this constant desirous tending towards unity, towards self-unity. And self-unity ultimately is self-identity. Okay? Now, it's not me deducing this. It's Plotinus himself that, I don't remember in which Ennead, I think Ennead 5.3, but it's somewhere in my commentary, you'll find it, defines thinking, noisis, as ephesis. Ephesis is tohen, desirous tending, ephesis, towards en, towards unity, towards being one. Which reality manifests this being one at the highest degree? The nous. The nous is that reality that more than any other reality manages to gather itself up and to keep itself gathered up around the one. Okay?
Then in the case where, does this explain why there are many things that we cannot put our finger on, like define clearly, but yet we have an intimate understanding of? like the examples you gave at the very beginning of this entire lecture series.
For example,
Like at the very beginning, you tried to ask us, what is love, for example? And then most of us jump to conclusions or definitions. It's something we know, but we cannot put a finger on clearly.
yeah, in a way, yes. In a way, yes. I mean, that could be an instance of this. But here, we have to keep in mind that what Plotinus is getting at is mostly an attempt to understand the subsistence of each thing as a thing, okay? Literally the subsistence. How does a thing maintain itself up as a thing? That's the question that Plotinus asks. And the answer is that each thing maintains itself up as a thing, as an act, a continuous act of a tending towards oneness, marked by desire of oneness. All right.
Yes, it's clear now.
Okay. Now let's see.
Prof, can I
Yes.
ask a question? Yeah. So, is it right then to say that this is the complete opposite of the idea of Zen Buddhism and the idea of ego death, where this is the epitome of self-identification, being the wise man, versus the idea of reaching a state where it's you're completely gone per se?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure about Buddhist Zen because I don't know much about it. However, what Plotinus is getting at here is not individuality. It's not individuality, but is the core of what allows anything to be the thing it is. And that core is the tending desire towards the one. At that point, one has to ask, if everything tends towards the one and desires the one, what is the one? Well, the one is not one of the things, Plotinus says. The one is not a thing. What is it then? The one is the will that wants itself. So ultimately, what Plotinus is saying we should tend towards is not tending towards myself as my individuality, but I should tend towards that wanting, towards that will that wills itself. So I have to surpass my individuality, because my individuality de facto is already a depowering of that original act of will. We will see as we proceed and we go towards the end of the treatise, that ultimately for Plotinus, the being of each thing is, on the one hand, the result of a making, on the other, of a making that works as the unfolding of a will. Okay? So what you have to join is the will itself. Being is will. Will that manifests itself as making. Making of what? Making of itself. But the itself at that point is already a result of the will. Hence, what you tend to is the will, the pure will. So as I said, I don't know how this maps in relation to or against Zen Buddhism, because I don't know much about Zen Buddhism. But for sure, it's not the exaltation of individuality. A concept that, by the way, Plotinus does never use as a key term, and that the few times he refers to it in a so to say, under a negative light, so to say.
Okay, thanks, Prof.
Welcome. Any other question?
I think Wei Min has a question in the chat.
Yes. Ah, yeah, in the chat, yes. So how is each act of vision at the same time a conversion towards the higher level that precedes it? It is through how the higher soul keeps itself in its original unity through confidence. There is an end to this upgoing process of acts of vision, and that end comes once we reach the intellect, the nous. The nous is the highest act of vision, and that act of vision is actually the act of vision that keeps itself up as act of vision. And as such, it looks at something. At what? At itself. And looking at itself, what is it that it sees? It sees the one. And what is then the nous? The nous is the one that sees itself. Okay, so we're going to talk about this once we reach the part on the nous, which, by the way, represents the core of Plotinus's thinking. That's really the core of Plotinus's thinking. Is the moment in which making and will perfectly coincide. So the question that Wei Min is posing is very important. And for now, I just gave you a quick answer. But an answer that, if you pay attention to it, will enable you to go through chapter 8 and 9 with already an important key to understand what Plotinus is saying. Any other question? Sorry guys, I'm taking advantage of the fact that my wife left so I can smoke a bit. If there are no more questions, we can stop here. And by tomorrow, I hope to be able to upload the translation of chapter 8 and 9. The translation of chapter 7 is already there, but I haven't uploaded it yet. So I'm waiting for 8 and 9 to be ready before uploading the whole thing up. And one thing that I recommend you to do now that you read 8 and 9 is to read, and also 7, which we haven't read yet. And 7 is a central chapter, even though it looks like a summary of what has been said so far. 7 is an important chapter. So read it up carefully. My recommendation is that for chapter 7, 8, and 9, you read carefully, religiously, my commentary. Keeping in mind that my commentary is not in any way in its final version, so it has much to be wanted for. However, that's the first attempt. So, yeah, read it carefully because it's gonna help us up in our dealing with these very difficult chapters, okay, and with the reality of the nous, okay? All right. Okay, guys.
Okay, thank you,
Off
Professor.
I go, and I'll see you next week.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Thanks,
Bye.
Prof.
Bye.